I first would like to announce a few reshuffles or shuffles from the agenda that you have in your hands. So I'm not Milica Begovic. She's unfortunately, I'm a stand-in for her today. My name is Lejla Sadiku. I also work at the Regional Bureau for Europe and Central Asia. And our session will be somewhat shorter because we understood it's a bit of two different messages. And we'll have 3 speakers presenting today. I am very pleased and honored to introduce to you our panel, which will be composed of Chitra, who's got a doctorate in geography. She has 20 years of experience working in the private sector in gender and agriculture and on strategic planning and RBM. She's new to evaluations, and she is a senior evaluations officer for EFAD. And she'll be presenting first on some of the findings from the ICT for Evaluations conference that they've recently held. Also on our panel is Paula, who also has a doctorate in geography. That is a recurring theme today. She's been working in development for the last 18 years, mainly in the field. She manages the Kampala Pulse Lab, and she's been doing that for the last 3 years. And our third panelist is Dimitri Belan, who comes from MILAB in Moldova, which is a public innovation lab that supports the government in rolling out or in testing out new approaches to address struggles, challenges that the public sector faces, and in opening up new data sources for policymaking. We have a panel with very rich and diverse experiences. And on that, well, maybe not on that happy note, maybe I can just give you a bit of background in terms of why we decided to pursue this topic. 2 days ago, actually, we had a kickoff meeting for a data innovation project that looks at measurement of SDG Tier 3 indicators. And what we're noticing not only and we brought together 13 countries from around the world, 13 country offices of UNDP. And what we notice is that while maybe there's sometimes some kind of resistance to using new data sources sometimes from statistical offices, at the same time, there's a significant growing demand to understand what is the potential of different sources of data, how they can be applied in policymaking, and how we can merge the political aspect, so creating the buy-in that we need, with the technical aspect of having data in real time so that programs can respond in real time, adjust and adapt, with the partnerships that need to be in place for the successful delivery of such projects. So that is just one of the initiatives that we're starting off now. And in the last few years, UNDP and other partners as well, and people we have on the panel today, have been testing out how to reach the impact that we want, how can we respond in real time to changing environments. And while household surveys are great in terms of creating the ground truths, at the same time, they're slow often, they take time, and they're very resource intensive. So today, what we're going to be looking at is what else could we be looking at? What exists out there, and what do we have evidence that works? And how the people on the panel today have made it work in their respective contexts. So on that note, I'll give the floor to Chitra to share her experience.
It is an honor for me to be part of this esteemed panel and help you to kick off your Tier 3 SDG efforts, and to share the reflections of EFAD's Independent Office of Evaluation on the role of ICTs in generating new data for evaluations. The Sustainable Development Goals have evoked a need for new data. The new data may be primary data from new or existing sources that have not been collected before. They may also be existing data, mined more effectively and analyzed to generate new knowledge for better insights. This new data can help make evaluations more rigorous, triangulate findings, and make evaluation processes more efficient. The widespread availability of new technologies at a lower cost make real-time data accessible and allows access to larger and more reliable data sets that can be analyzed faster. This ultimately shortens learning loops, making evaluation more efficient and potentially more effective by delivering findings to policymakers in a timely manner. In June of this year, IFAD's Independent Office of Evaluation organized the conference ICT for Evaluation to explore how ICTs can make evaluations more effective and efficient. Today, I will share a few experiences from our numerous presenters from UNEG, ECG, academia, NGOs, and government on using new technologies along the knowledge value chain of data collection, analysis, and dissemination. Geospatial analysis is one example that IFAD's IOE and other evaluation offices have used for data collection. With the absence of credible baselines, GIS methods allow for better identification of counterfactuals and control for external confounding effects, thus increasing the internal validity of the impact evaluations. By geocoding project interventions and using regularly updated satellite imagery, it is possible to accurately monitor and compare land use changes as they occur, as well as compare photos over longer timescales. Applications for these geospatial technologies range from monitoring crop patterns, surveying damage from natural disasters, to finding relevant control sites for counterfactual analysis. The ability of GIS software to combine quantitative and qualitative methods with big data sets and machine learning approaches makes this a good venue for interdisciplinary research and thus very useful to Agenda 2030 and measuring the SDGs. However, it is worth noting that due to the uneven availability and accuracy of contextual variables across sites, remote sensing does not replace the need for more conventional evaluation methods of collecting and comparing data on the ground and engaging with beneficiaries. Analysis. Today, information risks being out of date before it is even published, which in turn makes it hard for informed decision making. Considering how the possibility of finding new, additional, and relevant information decreases as the amount of screened literature increases, machine learning software can be trained to automate this process and be taught to exclude less relevant studies. This process is iterative, always requiring groundwork and continuous monitoring and refining by evaluators. This technique, though, can produce substantial workload reduction as high as 70%. However, there is a risk of bias in the assessment of literature by computers that may result in overlooking some relevant studies. Looking ahead, one major opportunity in this field is the possibility of living systematic reviews that are continuously updated by machines and users as evidence becomes available. Thus, systematic reviews could become more useful for decision and policy makers as they could be made available at the time when decisions are actually being made. Dissemination. The main opportunity that new technologies offer to evaluation is the possibility for real-time feedback to beneficiaries. The use of computer-assisted personal interviews allows real-time data analysis which makes it possible to incorporate community feedback during the household survey. Advantages of this approach include increased mutual learning and possibly discovering overlooked information, greater community engagement, which reduces the feeling of household surveys being an extractive exercise. 3, increased validation and understanding of the findings. Some limitations exist, though, such as the fact that not all household surveys can be conducted using digital devices, the need for coordination between staff and training of those staff who are working on different parts of the process, and potential privacy issues, as well as sensitivities surrounding sharing data. From the collective knowledge of the ICT for Eval conference, many lessons and reflections for the future emerge. First, ICTs do offer scope for increased efficiencies. The field to policymaker loop is shortened with real-time collection and analysis of new data. We also found scope for increased analytical rigor and more robust results for decision-making using more diverse data sources. This creates a greater opportunity for triangulation with a multitude of data sources not previously available to evaluators. Thirdly, technology may also help us listen and communicate better with target groups. In conclusion, technology is a tool that can improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our evaluations. However, new technologies and the new data they produce are only as good as the evaluators who use them. And as the ICT for Eval conference reminded us, behind every data point is a human story. This means that evaluations still need to be grounded in theory and need to remain human-centric. We need to ensure that new technologies do not exclude marginalized people or distort their stories. We also need to ethically consider the privacy and dignity of the people whose lives these data represent. Therefore, we must handle these human stories with great care and respect. As we move forward to use new technologies to measure the SDGs, we must tap into complementary and shared capacities with a greater variety of partners. This task will not be easy, nor will it take a linear path. The alignment of organizational processes will require overcoming both organizational and human inertia in order to grow, innovate, and learn. Thank you.
My name is Paula, and I work in Kampala as manager of Post-Lab Kampala, which is one of the 3 labs of the UN Global Pulse Network. What do we do there? What we do is to support the adoption of big data for development practice. And we work, as you can see, with anybody who wants to work with us. So from here, I send invitation to those in the room to approach me after this and talk about doing something together. We work with academia, with private sector, with the government of Uganda is our priority, but also with other governments in the region and with development practitioners. I'm going to deliver a very, very brief presentation in which I'm going to show you 3 examples of use of technology and big data to support evaluations. It's going to be very, very specific, very clear examples. But let me first do a reflection and share with you some thoughts about big data and data generated in real time. We live in a digital era. That means that huge amounts of data are generated every day, everywhere in the world, as people go on with their daily lives. So research says that in the last 2 years in human history, more data has been generated than in all human history. Imagine that amount of data. But is this happening everywhere in the world? What do you think about Uganda? What do you think about Africa? Let me give you some data about this. The digital data is generated with digital devices. The most popular digital device is the mobile phone. Can you imagine your life without a mobile phone? Well, the same is happening in Africa right now. So, for example, Nigeria, a decade ago, 10 years ago, had around 100,000 phone lines. 100,000, 10 years ago. Today, there are around 140 million active mobile phone lines in Nigeria. Researchers are estimating that the use of internet and mobile phones in Africa is growing 10 times more in that part of the world than anywhere else in the world. And the estimate says that it's going to continue like that for a few years. So, the daily use of digital devices is exponentially increasing in Uganda and in Africa as anywhere else in the world. So, while we very well know that big data normally does not represent the universe of analysis, do you still think that millions and millions and millions of data bits generated on a daily basis cannot tell us something about how our programs are impacting people's life? What you see here is fluctuations on traveling time from Kampala to the rest of the country on a daily basis. It shows that every day it changes because of the different condition of the roads, traffic, etc., etc. Now, this data is coming from about 10 million people generating data on a daily basis. Again, it's not the whole country, but 10 million people's data might tell us something that is useful for development practice. But this is what we do in PostLab Kampala. Try to find examples and practical examples to show the usability of this data. And let me now go back to the real examples. Sorry about this one. So this one is Boda Boda movement in Kampala. It says taxis, motor taxis moving in Kampala, real time. This was just to emphasize the idea of real time. This is real time data. This is as the Boda Bodas really move, okay? Let me now go back to the examples. I have 3 examples for you. The first one is about Facebook data, and this is an exercise that we conducted with UNDP and the government of Uganda. So there were elections in Uganda last year, and the UN with the government supported the first ever televised debates, electoral debates. The discussions about the electoral debate on TV became worldwide trending topic on Facebook. And this doesn't happen normally in Uganda, that something comes a worldwide trending topic. So it really generated a lot of discussions. So with UNDP, we said, hey, what about looking into what is people really saying about the debate? Maybe it can support to evaluate the impact of the debate. So what we did was to analyze messages that were posted on Facebook by around 25,000 individuals. Again, think about it. Is it representative of the whole country? No. But can the comments of 25,000 individuals unfiltered tell us something about the debate? That's what we did. So the analysis, we conducted data mining technique, and the analysis showed really a lot of reflections about the organization of the debates, about the candidates, about many things that the UNDP and the government found interesting to organize eventually a next debate. This is my first example. Let me now move to the next one. It's a bit different. So, many people say that as not everybody is using Facebook, for example, that is a very common social media platform that generates a lot of data. Not everybody has a mobile phone. Again, big data is not representative. So that's why in Uganda, with partners, we decided to apply the same technique of data mining that we use into social media, into text, to radio. It sounds very easy, but it's not. So we developed the technology with partners in Stellenbosch University, and we've been working 3 years on this. This is based on artificial intelligence. And it's quite complex because basically we need to teach Ugandan languages to the machine. So it's like teaching a kid to learn a new language. So now we have a working prototype for Acholi and Luganda, which are 2 vernacular languages in Uganda. Now, what did we do with this? We've done several pilots, and on our website there is a very nice report about all the pilots that we conducted with partners to test the usability of this. But to give you an example very clear for evaluation, which is the topic of this conference, we used this to evaluate a radio campaign that was done by the NGO Save the Children in Uganda. So NGO Save the Children agreed with the radio stations to play a song against child abuse. And with this application, we really evaluated if the song had been played or not. As simple as that. Not an estimation, no. Just to really check if the song was on air or not, because this prototype that we have built can really transform into text all the audio discussions, public discussions on the radio. So we had some error, of course. I'm not going to say it was 100% accurate, but hey, it's like we can really check and evaluate in real time with real numbers if the campaign is there or not. And I move now to the third example. I can't see. So the next example is about ambulances. And it's a very different type of data. It's data generated with GPS tracking, global positioning system tracking. The main cause of death in Uganda is maternal health. So we are working with a partner, with the Belgian Corporation and Ministry of Health, to develop a system to monitor use of ambulances. So development partners have agreed with the government on donation of a very important number of ambulances for 2 regions. This is a pilot. If it is proved with an evaluation that the ambulances are used for the purposes that are meant to be used, and then the idea is to expand this pilot to the rest of the country. So we're developing this application that technically is much more simple than the radio application because it's something that exists out there. It's just tracking. So the same GPS that is installed in many cars, just doing tracking. So for example, for security measure of vehicles, this is a very common system. So basically, the system is gonna do real tracking, it's gonna provide alerts of, for example, the ambulances are in an area that are not supposed to be because there are no health centers, or an ambulance has been stationed for too many hours, so that means it's not carrying patients. But then it will also generate analytics in real time on the efficiency and the efficacy of the use of the ambulances. So in terms of kilometers, number of kilometers, number of liters of fuel, trips back and forth to the health centers versus patients, estimation on the patients, etc. So it's a tool that is going to allow the evaluation of the use of the ambulances. These were my 3 examples, and I just want to invite you to finalize, to go online and find in the UN Global Pulse website this manual, which is the first manual that has been produced by the UN system to incorporate big data into monitoring and evaluation. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, the audience. My name is Dima Bilan, as Lejla has already mentioned. I'm working within the Moldova Innovation Lab. Actually, it's a kind of innovation unit within Moldovan government. And one of our direction of the work is the promotion of the opening up of new data for better policy making in the country. And today I would like to give you an example of one of our projects. It's a very teasing name, Ghost Villages project. but actually is a tool for alternative measurement of population in Moldova. So what is the context? In Moldova, official data on population measurement are accessible only through census so far. And census is happening only once per 10, 12 years. The last census happened in 2014, and actually the results were published in 2017 due to some political reasons and due to some methodological problems that happened when the analyzing of these census. Moreover, the significant delay was coupled with questions on the robustness of the approach, and not every household was questions within these census. So we have, at the same time, we have a huge trend on the outcoming of the population from the country. We have a huge immigration, and around 1 million of population of Moldovan citizens are working abroad and living permanently. That's why it's very difficult to measure precisely how many people are living in the country at the moment or how many people are living abroad. We have only approximate data. And as a result of this immigration outflow, we have a huge depopulation of rural areas or ghost villages. So what is the ultimate objective of the project we're working at? We'd like to create a mechanism for estimating population density and household occupancy in Moldova using energy consumption data. At the same time, while using the energy consumption data like a proxy, we would like to spot the ghost villages or the abandoned communities of parts of the communities where households are empty. So using this indicator, we're hoping to see whether the household where will be measured the consumption of the energy is actually somebody living there or it is depopulated. How are we going to do this? First of all, we selected 10 communities in the southern parts of the Republic of Moldova. And why we did this? Because they're covered by a single energy provider. We had 3 tiers of localities. The first tier is the localities under 100 people. The second one is localities about 1,000 of people who are living there. And the third tier is the people or localities at the border at the border with Romania. So these data were analyzed, and we selected these localities based on the census of 2004. Afterwards, we'd like to geocode the addresses from the energy data set we will have and map them using the GIS maps. So you see on your screen how it will look like according to our logic. The third thing we are working at is we'd like to analyze energy consumption patterns. And analyzing these patterns, we would like to estimate the threshold under which the dwelling will be considered unpopulated. Effectively, we'll analyze the functional number of people living in the dwelling and energy consumed according with this data. And the fourth thing we'd like to use, and the previous speaker has already been talking about this, we'd like to use the validation of results by going directly to these houses, to these households, and to see whether our results, whether other results are based on the real number of people who are living there. And we'd like to see what factors influence the volume of the energy consumption that this household is using. So it's kind of the thick data analysis we would like to do. We'd like to humanize the data we'll have. So what is the difference between our methodology and the business as usual, conventional business? So you can see the periodicity and availability of data based on the conventional census. We have once per 10 years. In our case, we will have monthly based data because energy consumption bills are coming to the population, to the households based on the monthly basis. We will have the reliability of data will be more efficient and effective because we will have each household which will have a unique identification number based on the energy consumption bill. When we're speaking about the census, then not every household is questioned or is surveyed during the census. These aggregations of data, we'll have them based on the household level, whereas in the census case, we have community-based level. Robustness of data. The census does not capture the migration phenomena. They are evaluating the population volume and the population number at the moment when the census has been conducted, while our tool will be capturing the migration and internal migration flows. And financial sustainability, it is last but not least. Census costs around 5 million euros, while our tool we're working at is about 35,000 euros. So how are we going to use the data we will be collecting in the decision-making processes and informing the policy-making processes? First of all, it's better budgeting planning, because you know, maybe in other countries it doesn't happen, but in Moldova the budgeting process and budgeting planning on the development projects on the local level are taking place based on the number of population living in this or that area. At the same time, in Moldova we are having the public administration reform, and one of the key components is the territorial administrative reform of the country. That's why it will be very important for the government to see how many people are living in this or that rural community in order to have better plan on the planning of new territorial administrative structure of the country. The third thing is the measuring of the population income. We have a hypothesis that based on the energy data we will have during this exercise, we can use this data as a proxy to see the income of the population and the fluctuations of this income. And actually we would like to analyze if these fluctuations of the income can be used, can be a more reliable proxy than household surveys, which are happening once per 3 months in Moldova and conducted by the National Statistics Office. At the same time, we will see the immigration and emigration patterns. For instance, in Moldova, a lot of people are coming to holidays home, for instance, for Christmas or Easter. And for government and local public authorities, it will be very useful to know when people are coming home in order to consult some decisions which have high importance, huge importance for the locality. Thank you for your attention.
We hope we managed to inspire with different examples from different sources of data, and hopefully you can get a sense of where this evidence can be found. So are there any questions from?
Thing is that we are discussing a bit SDG and at the same time some big data and then data initiatives. We are generating lots of data. Some data are analyzed, some data people don't analyze, and as our country statistics office is always preserving all those data. Some data are coming to the visualization, some are not. When there are good visualization of data, then policymakers attractions will look at the data, otherwise they are not a bit interested in this data. But how can we connect big data? You have done lots of good projects in terms of big data, but we have also done in Dhaka city, we have analyzed last 10 years data to a bit contribute in the planning of next 10 years. Electricity planning. That is electricity data we have analyzed with some social data with GIS data. That is what is the poverty condition, consumption, and what is the variation in terms of time, season, everything. But if we look at the SDG indicators, what types of data you can connect with the indicators to contribute in the monitoring and evaluation? And are all big data projects are successful, showing something a bit better result to attract the policymakers, at the same time to contribute in the measurement of SDG results? And how can we a bit initiate some data project to contribute a bit in a better way in SDGs?
And this in a way relates to the previous question. While deciding about going this way or not going that way, we would certainly need to weigh costs against the benefits. So I would wonder, how do you estimate what are the costs of initiating these new projects, and then how it weighs against the benefits that the information brings? Thank you. Thank you.
I'll take the first one that is very specific about big data and examples. I think I can give you some examples because big data is just data. It's just other type of data. It's different, so we have to treat it different, we have to understand it differently, and we have to use it differently. But it's just data. It's just that it's a bit unfamiliar. We're a bit unfamiliar with it, and it's a bit scary sometimes that only data scientists understand what is behind the fancy graphs and the fancy images. But it's just data. So it can be used to monitor and report on the SDGs as any other type of data. And let me give you 3 examples. I was just sharing with Zita before an exercise we conducted in Kampala with National Water and Sewerage Company, in which we analyzed 5 years of daily data consumption in Kampala. We analyzed that, and as a result, we saw that one person living in an affluent area of Kampala consumes 8 times more water than a person living in a slum. That is the SDG on inequality. Okay, that's a clear measure, measure of inequality. Another example, we're about to launch from Kampala with partners a large-scale project to do automatic identification of different types of roof. Different types of roof and the change from thatch roof to metal roof in Uganda and in other countries in the region is a very good proxy indicator of poverty standing alone. As any other proxy, it's much better with other proxies, but standing alone is a really good one. It's acknowledged by everyone that it's a really good standing alone proxy indicator of poverty. So we're going to use it to monitor trends on SDG 1, poverty. And third, on the application that I showed before on the radio, we are now using it with partners in the UN system and government to monitor SDG 16. We are conducting an analysis right now of reactions on the influx of refugees with the hosting population. Right now, Uganda is the country in the world with around 1.2 million refugees and an average of 2,000 refugees coming into the country every day. So naturally, some tensions are emerging with the hosting communities. So we're using the radio application to really monitor that, and that's SDG 16.
I'll start by talking about the costs. I think in all of the methods discussed, there are actually, in fact, the lower costs of new technologies is part of the driver of the new data being created. Because as you, the technologies range from using Skype for interviews, of course, and wireless, etc. Now there are different savings and there are different costs for each of the technologies. But for example, geospatial, much of the software is free, like Collect Earth and Earth observation. And so in that case, the technology is free. It can also save you money because you don't, in a sense, if it's an environmental project, you don't necessarily need a baseline to do a baseline survey. As long as you geocode your project from the start, then you, at the end of the project, you can then see if there was a change in the environment. So if you wanted to see if there were increased crop production, then you can have these images over that time period, and you will not have done a baseline survey, which can be from $10,000 to $100,000, just as an example. There are others where there is some kind of cost in terms of training. So we had examples that I didn't mention on mobile surveys, whereas the problem is that you have to train your staff. And that takes time, which is a cost as well. But there are other cost savings. So in the example of the systematic reviews, we actually have seen a 70% reduction in the workload. So you're going from 1 month, to do the evidence and gap map to 10 days. You're going from systematic reviews that take 12 to 24 months to taking 100 days. So that's a huge cost reduction. We also found in this participatory household surveys using mobiles There again, you have initial cost where you have to do the training, etc. But once you do that, you immediately, each day after doing the survey, you immediately, once you get to a point, and we'll go to the connectivity issue, but if you have connectivity, you can upload the data, the enumerators can upload the data, and then it can be cleaned and analyzed. And then you can already follow the progress and return the data to the community. So you're doing your validation at the same time almost as the enumeration. So again, you're reducing the household survey. Again, the cost saving is in the time. There's also cost saving, and now I'll switch to your question, because in that process, you asked about quality assurance. So in the process of actually collecting, sending the data, we're actually cleaning the data. And so there you have better quality assurance. And you can build into the questions, the household surveys, certain checks. So you start asking somebody, how do they spend, you know, their day? And the question, the actual program can tell you if they've gone over 100%. And then you can either immediately ask them to check, or you can go back. But again, you're checking the data, because if you're able to present the data back to the community and ask them, they're able to validate that data. So there are ways of basically in this time saving that you can also do quality assurance and also save time. But I also wanted to talk about the connectivity, because that is a problem. And so in those cases, of course, you know, the thing is, if you can program it, you can collect, and then you do need to find at some point a place where you can connect and upload that data. But I wanted to touch on the political sensitivity. Sometimes the Oxfam presented on this, and they said sometimes you cannot, for political reasons, you know, use the technology, and people may feel uncomfortable that you're collecting, and who are you going to share that data with? And so you may need to use paper-based as well. So that's another different issue.
So as Paula has already said, these data can be used as cross-cutting data for indirect M&D process of the indicators. For instance, when we're talking about the poverty measurement and poverty indicators, when we have this energy consumption data, we can indirectly use the income fluctuations at each household, for instance. SDG 11, there is an indicator regarding the proportion of the development plans or projects which are consulted with the population by the authorities. So having the data on the number of population, number of people living in this or that community, the local public authorities can see with whom they have to consult and how they have to do this, how to organize the process. So to my mind is a cross-cutting data which can help indirectly to monitor and evaluate the SDG indicators. There was a question from the Georgian colleagues, I suppose, regarding the cost benefits. So our project actually is very small, it's about 35,000 euros. And doing this project, we do not necessarily need the huge money, because what we need the data from the energy consumption bills, the access of this data, and we were talking with the energy company. We have a monopoly in the country regarding the access of this data, and they're pretty open to do this. Secondly, what we do, we need the mentorship for the elaborating of the econometric models in order to evaluate the actual number of population living in the households. But what are the benefits? As I have already mentioned, the approximate number of money spent for the census each 10 years is about 5 million euros in Moldova. It's one saving we can contribute to. The second one, we can contribute to the more accountable and proper development planning at the local level. Because as I have said in the presentation, the development projects and budget planning is based on the number of population which is living in this or that locality. And sometimes it is happening that the data, the planning is based on the data of 10 years late, from 2004, for instance. And for sure, the number of population living in this area is not the same as it was 10 years ago. That's why the money is coming to the locality, but it is not based on the real number of population, and that's why it's rather difficult to control where this money is going. That's why we can have a more accountable budget plan in this case. And the third one is as I have already figured out during these 5 minutes, is the household surveys which are conducted by the National Bureau of Statistics, and they are trying to measure the income of the households. They are also being conducted every 3 months in Moldova. And somehow this tool we are working at can substitute this methodology as well. So there are a lot of other indirect benefits, but we have to analyze this as well. And regarding the quality assurance of the data, while working on the project, we are applying the collaborative and experimental approach. So we're doing this in 10 localities, and before putting in place and before the implementation of this tool, we are going directly to the households in all these localities in an attempt to see how many people in reality are living there, and to understand what factors are influencing on the volume of the energy consumption which every household is experiencing. So by humanizing these big data we have behind this ecosystem, we're trying to ensure the quality of the data and the results.
Because these were excellent questions, and they're really the questions we all have to be thinking about, and I don't have all the answers to. So, but first, from the African Development Bank and on privacy. So one on the positive side, we find that ICTs can actually can also be helpful in privacy. For example, again, back to the Oxfam example, and in their use of mobile technologies to collect the data, they actually had a special sort of data key, and so only one person could access it. And so the question is then, you really have to ensure you're mindful of it and build this in. So that this is positive because it means the data it flows through fewer hands, shall we say. You know, traditional method, you have many hands, in fact. You know, first, of course, the translator, and then the paper needs to move to a system where it's then analyzed. But as it just goes from the enumerator straight into the database, you have fewer hands touching the data, so that helps. But another aspect, again, to be mindful of is anonymity. So, and I think this goes for all of, this is a basic research concept, you know, ensuring that the data you collect, and when you're speaking to maybe your beneficiaries, that you ensure that you collect this data and they feel secure that you are going to ensure that it's anonymous and the data can't be traced back. Because, you know, one can think about, you know, if you're going to use the electricity bills, for example, for income, you know, and there are certain assumptions then. Are you expecting that the incomes of these people are higher? And then you give that information to the tax division, and you have to ensure that you build those walls in order to, you have to realize that the big data is out there, right? But we need to make sure that it's anonymous so that it isn't used improperly. I have a friend who's also working on a big data project in New York, and you know, they're collecting a lot of data about a person's personal health. You know, they're actually doing exams about their blood pressure, et cetera, in order to see what are the impacts of, you know, certain lifestyles. And that's so critical that we maintain the anonymity of these persons. So I think we have to be aware, and it's really important. I can't emphasize enough that it's important to be mindful. Regarding the human aspect, and how do we, I think we need to remember again that I think in some of these methods, and again going back to the Oxfam, but we had another example about SenseMaker. We were, again, the technologies, before perhaps you go and you might extract the data And then, did you ever return the results to the community? You know, sometimes we didn't. And now that the ICT actually allows us to do that. And another positive thing is, so again, if we build these in, we keep it human. So the fact that we can get the data more quickly, we can immediately return the data, and then share it with them and see if it's valid. Is it actually capturing their experience? Are we adding our own interpretation? Usually we went off and added our own interpretation. Now we can actually see if the data reflects their reality. As was mentioned this morning, you know, how many hurricanes do you experience in your life? That's what's meaningful to them. And this allows us to do that. And so you just have to remember this, and it can be built in so that the ICT doesn't forget about the human experience. And in terms of data equality, that's very important, because as we know, you know, often in homes, particularly in developing country, who actually holds that mobile phone, right? Whose data is being collected? Most likely a male in the household, not the female. So again, we need to be aware of this to ensure that there aren't biases, you know, gender biases. And then we need to ensure ways that the full community's views are collected. So again, we can't just you know, throw out images and, you know, just take the geospatial and this is the data. We have to engage with the community. So that's my message on that. And there was the woman from Gambia mentioned about raising undue expectations, and I think that's an important point. And that was also raised by Oxfam, because there's an issue of when you present the results again to the community, you might be raising their expectations that they will receive more aid, etc. So there you just have to be very clear and upfront about that. And the president of the Association of Evaluation Algeria, you raised big questions. I don't know if I have the answers for them, but I could just emphasize that I agree that these are important. You mentioned agriculture and better, you know, these cross-cutting areas. And I would just say, give you the example that, again, geospatial imagery does help us in these cross-cutting areas. So for example, we, working for EFAD, we're interested in agriculture, but we're also interested in sustainable environmental issues as well. So the geospatial you know, images help us see if in fact our increased agricultural production is how it's impacting the environment. So it's about, again, back to the point about the evaluator. It's about the evaluator and how we use the technology. The technology is not a panacea, and we still need to use our traditional methodologies. So thank you.
I'll also go through all of them quickly, just focusing on some points. So starting from the last one about gender equality. This is a different type of data, so as any other data set, we'll need to analyze that. So there is not a yes or no answer. Very likely, because the access to digital devices is more predominant for male than for female, there will be a bias towards that. But still, does it mean that the data is not useful? It won't be useful in the way we approach the type of data. When we do data collection to analyze a population group, we are focusing mainly on representativeness. As a geographer, my obsession is representativeness. So I know it's not going to be representative of the universe of analysis, but still, can millions of data points generated by millions of population tell you something? Well, let's go and check it. Let's check it out and let's see. You know, there's a yes or no. The question on privacy, thank you. We didn't bring it up in the presentation, but it's very, very important. For us in UN Global Pulse, the work on data privacy is as important on the work on developing technology to prove the use of big data. So there is a group called Data Privacy Advisory Group Global that is composed by experts from private sector, academia, and governments on data privacy. And the first set of principles on ethics for the use of big data has been generated by this group. The first set of principles and the first manuals on how to approach big data ethically. for development practice. What does it mean? The implications when doing a project. There are implications for IT, implications for software, implications for the treatment of data, and implications for the type of analysis, and implications for the communication of the type of analysis. You can only imagine for the radio application how important privacy issues are in the context where we are. So again, as much work was put into risk analysis and putting measures on all these things as it was put into developing the technology. So it's very, very important. So thank you for raising that question. The issue with National Bureau of Statistics, yes, they are coming on board, and responding to the inspector on this one. A lot of work is done from development partners to approach Bureau of Statistics. In Africa, I know for sure because we've done quite a lot of work with Bureau of Statistics, and after many years of sensitivization, now Bureau of Statistics are leading some of these tests of big data for national statistics. And I think the issue of cost, at the end of the day, is a very good point for this National Bureau of Statistics, because while the investment at the beginning of the technology can be high, in the long term, as Moldova was explaining, reduces dramatically the cost for data collection. So I think that's the reason why now they are coming on board. And the question about the skills from our colleague from Nigeria, as this is a new type of data, it requires new skills, you know, and both in development practice and evaluation, and also in National Bureau of Statistics, traditionally, the last years or decades, we have certain profiles and skills. So this requires new skills. I can tell you, for example, the skill sets that we have in the lab, because at the end we are producing this technology and these examples on how to use the technology with a different set of skills. So we have data scientists, artificial intelligence advisors, data engineers, data visualization experts, and then experts on development practice, experts on social issues, experts in economy. So you need to bring both worlds together, the ones that know about the data, how to handle it, how to manage it, how to treat it, but also those that can make sense of what that data means in reality. So it's really a whole new thing, and data science is a new science. It's a new science, and people with very different profiles are joining this the science movement. But more and more, we're moving now into artificial intelligence. So these are, now people is starting to say, let's not talk about data science, let's talk about artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence is really helping us to transform the whole world into data points, basically. So it's much more interesting now. It's moving really fast.
And actually, when we started this project on the alternative measurement of population, we didn't start it out of the context. And we brought in the management of the National Statistics Office, proposed this idea, they agreed to follow this idea, and afterwards, and I'm here passing to the triangulation of the data. Of course, they cannot accept this data from this creation and say, yes, we agree to use this data. And before putting this mechanism in place, we have to verify the robustness of this data and to have a triangulation of the data. That's why, as I have already mentioned, that before putting in place, we are going to each household in an attempt to see what factors are influencing the consumption of the energy in each household. And we are asking the people who are living there not only for the tendency or trend during the past several months, because we'll have the data for the past 5 years, and we'll like to see what influenced the let's say the jumps in the consumptions of the energy or the downfalls in the consumptions. That's why, once again, before the implementation of the mechanism, we are going and asking, what do you have? What home appliances do you have? And maybe the specifics you have in the US can also influence the behavior of people living in households in Moldova as well. So regarding the question on the computer sciences and new skills, working at this project in particular, we are trying not to create the additional burden for the public institutions. And we're trying to use the machines which will automatically analyze this data and will translate this data into the concrete GIS maps, as you have seen from the examples. And actually, I'm the proponent of the theory that next 5, 7, 10 years, machines and artificial intelligence will substitute, will replace some skills that public servants do not have at the moment. And but during this project in particular, and during some other development project we're working at related with data, we're trying not to bring some software or to bring some new technologies which will make the work of the public servants we're dealing with more complex. We're trying to simplify their work. And the last question regarding the MyLab, I think this question is out of the panel, but I will try to answer briefly. Actually, in 10 days, we'll have Innovation Days in Istanbul, where we'll be talking during the 3 days about the public sector labs and how they work. But regarding the MyLab, yes, we're working in the center of the government, in the State Chancellery, under the auspices of the Secretary General. And one of the receipts for the success is that we're aligning our priorities and our work with the priorities of the government. And currently, we are focused on the public administration reform, and in particular on the modernization of public services, improvement of the public service, and promotion of the evidence-based policy making in the policy making process.
Final statement. And I wanted to actually share a quick, short anecdote. You have to know your data sources. So if you look at, for example, Google and Facebook data, in Google, if you mine Google data, the most associated word with husband is jerk and gay, whereas on Facebook, it's best friend and great. So, my short anecdote. Closing statements?
No, so yeah. I think along the same lines, it's back to the data, your analysis, your results and findings are only as good as the data that you have. And we can't think that, again, we look at, if we take the social media as a data source and we see the recent, elections in the United States and the fake news and the influence, we have to be aware of that. And we also have to remember, I guess I'm a bit counter to what Dimitri said about replacing humans. I mean, there might be some automated actions that artificial intelligence can replace, but no one can replace sort of the human element. And so in all of the technologies, the human needs to analyze the data and program the artificial intelligence, and there needs to be an interaction between the two, because otherwise, if you go just for the mean, you might be missing the very important outliers that are more telling about the solution. So thank you.
The SDGs tell us, if you go through all of them and all the indicators, really speak about the challenges that we have these days in the world. I will say, to address those challenges, it's time to do things differently. It's time to try new things, because doing business as usual is too risky. Doing business as usual is not taking us to change the trends. So it's time to try something new. Big data and artificial intelligence are offering us great new opportunities. Let's not discard them before really giving them a try.
Data can be a very valuable source for the better policy making and for the achieving of the SDGs. But I will partially agree with Chanti regarding the artificial intelligence and machine learning. Actually, these things and data analysis, they can replace some skills which can save the time of the public servants in order to use this time to the interpretation of this data and translation them in concrete policy action for the better and resilient lives. That's why I call you to use the data and to see the data not only from the point of view of the technical source, but also to have some human stories behind the data, some thick data, as we are used to talk in the innovation labs.
Well, we hope we managed to inspire to use new data, old data in new ways, and to not forget about the humans in that process. Thanks to all, and thanks to the panelists for amazing presentations, and to everybody in the audience for great questions.